Does Missouri have what it takes to win in Nashville tomorrow? Let's talk about it on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And yes, usually men's basketball's my focus, but with Robin Pingeton officially stepping down yesterday, it's time to talk about a women's coaching search. And you know what? I've got a target already. I'll tell you about that young lady later in the program. But you know what? Let's start with the men's side, with the Missouri men playing such incredible basketball right now. But of course, Vanderbilt is going to be a game opponent tomorrow. And a lot of Missouri fans are feeling pessimistic tomorrow, including one listener, the Magic Man, who says Vanderbilt doesn't lose at home and they need it more than Missouri. Well, in a literal sense, I will say this. Vanderbilt has lost at home a couple times to some good teams. Of course, Auburn might be the best team in the country. They also lost to Mississippi State earlier in the season, before the Tigers perhaps broke Mississippi State in Starkville. They haven't been quite the same team since, but both of those games were 12-point losses by Vanderbilt at home. But I will say this, they have beaten Tennessee at home, they've beaten Kentucky, Texas, and Ole Miss. So the Commodores are going to be a formidable opponent without a doubt. And while Vanderbilt, no question, if they win this game tomorrow in Nashville, they're in the tournament. I think they're likely probably in anyway, probably need another win, that's for sure. But if they can beat Mizzou, a top 15 caliber type of team, that'll punch their ticket without a doubt. And yet, it's not a desperation situation, though, either, because Vanderbilt still has a couple of winnable games left at home against Arkansas and at Georgia. So, and yet, I still expect a big effort from the Commodores. And all at the same time, the Tigers have every incentive to win this game as well, according to Gabe DeArmond over at Power Mizzou, and he's absolutely right. The Tigers control their own destiny to a top 4 seed in the SEC tournament. And of course, getting that would be a heck of a long ways to go in getting a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament, which, as I said on yesterday's program, I think those are the seeds that really matter. Once you're in the top 4, it's more or less all gravy. Of course, you'd rather have a 1 than a 4. I'm not pretending otherwise. But I think a lot of it comes down to just how your bracket turns out and what types of matchups your particular team favors. And getting back to tomorrow's ball game, speaking of matchups, I like this matchup for Missouri. I really do, because this promises to be a high-scoring game. And one advantage for Missouri on paper, Vanderbilt so far the worst defensive team in the league statistically, and they're very bad against the three-point shot as well. But of course, the Commodores can score. They outscored Texas A&M recently. I just don't think they can score as much as Mizzou in this particular game. Once again, I like the matchup because, as some fans have said, well, maybe Missouri doesn't do quite as well in the slog type of games, when it's a little bit more free-flowing and open, a high-scoring type of affair, like against Alabama, for example. Well, the Tigers tend to do quite well, but against Texas, for example, maybe not quite as well, especially offensively in sort of a slow-it-down physical style type of game. So more than likely, I don't think that's what we're going to see tomorrow. So I think that's an advantage for Missouri. And obviously winning tomorrow would go a long way into getting at least a 4 seed in the SEC and at least a 4 seed in March Madness. Again, 4 is the magic number in my opinion. And you may have noticed these days I've been putting out more short videos and clips on the internet. Some of them are not are exclusive to those platforms, by the way, not necessarily something that I've done here. So if you want to check it out, Instagram, TikTok, for example, YouTube Shorts as well, also on Twitter, all of that at Locked On Mizzou. But speaking of TikTok, one TikTok user commented that Mizzou is not that good because they have a losing record on the road. Well, that was very short and to the point, and kind of stuck in my craw a little bit, I got to be honest, because the Tigers are indeed 3-5 on the road. That is a losing record. So I had to look and check the tape, if you will. Looked just kind of randomly at teams ranked around Missouri in the KenPom projections, for example. I really wanted to prove this point wrong somehow. But I couldn't totally. I have to be honest with you because, well, Michigan State, who's ranked right around Missouri at the moment, they're 6-2 on the road. Arizona, 6-3 on the road. Also, the Wildcats, well, they've lost 3 neutral games and a couple of games at home, whereas the Tigers have only lost 1 at home and I believe 1 neutral site game. Iowa State also ranked right around there, 5-5 on the road is Iowa State. So all of those teams, just 3 somewhat random teams ranked right around where Missouri is, all have at least 500 or better records on the road. Now, I will say, not all road schedules are created equally, of course. The Tigers had one of the easiest non-conference schedules in the country, but according to KenPom, actually the Memphis opener was the easiest road game for Missouri so far this season. Memphis, at the very least, is on the bubble, so there really hasn't been an easy game on the road for Missouri so far this season. And also, other than Auburn, it's not as though Missouri was dominated in any of the games it lost, including at Tennessee. Still, I have to say, to this person's point, I'd like to see another road victory, that's for sure, and just shut down that negative thought that has now been implanted in the back of my head and is frankly stuck in my craw a little bit. So thank you, TikTok, very much for that. And recently here on this podcast, I speculated, hey, Jacob Cruz, who played some junior college basketball, could he be eligible for another season next year under the what I'll call the Diego Pavia rule? Well, Dennis Gates was asked that question. I'll tell you what his answer was coming up here in just a little bit. But first, Locked On Mizzou fans, the future of college sports is here, and it's transparent. Before the Roy app, NIL negotiations often happened under the table, and fans didn't have a clear and direct way to support the athletes that they love. Well, now with Roy, that has all changed. Roy, the NIL app, allows you to choose the player you want to support, decide how much to contribute, and receive exclusive content from the athletes you back. The best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back. It's a risk-free way to show your support. The Roy app is giving fans control, no more uncertainty. Now you can provide transparent, impactful support and help shape the future of college sports with your contributions. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing Mizzou athletes the way they deserve, with transparency, trust, and a real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players. According to Callum McAndrew of the Columbia Daily Tribune, he tweeted out yesterday, quote, "Because of the NCAA's junior college ruling, Jacob Cruz will have an extra year of eligibility if he wants it," Dennis Gates says in response to Power Mizzou's question. But, quote, "We'll talk about that in the postseason to see what's best." Now, that's an interesting addendum there. Some people may read a little bit too much into that. Here's how I would read into that particular statement. First of all, good for Jacob Cruz, I would say. First of all, I think if he wants to come back, What a great opportunity for him, which was not available to players in the past. In the past, a guy like him, even if he had an extra year of eligibility, would probably go, probably time for me to start my pro career. But now that everybody is a semi-pro, well, that gives you an opportunity to, again, still basically start your pro career in college. So when Dennis Gates says we'll talk about what's best, I'm guessing he means what's best for Jacob Cruz, because I think that's another way of saying, hey, if Jacob wants to come back, he's welcome to come back, because I think especially the way he's played the past month for Missouri, he's really settled into the team, settled into the program here. There aren't that many guys his size who can knock down shots like he can. I think it's obvious that you bring him back next season. Again, if that's what he wants to do, who knows? He's been in college basketball for a while, bounced around quite a bit. I believe he's a young married man with a child and all that stuff. So maybe he just wants to start his real journey in real life and start actual pro basketball. Who the heck knows? I'm just saying, I think from Dennis Gates' perspective, I'll just say from my perspective, it's obvious that if Cruz wants to come back next year, that's something that Missouri should take advantage of, in my opinion. And as you've probably heard by now, Missouri's Robin Pingeton, their women's basketball coach, announced that she will be stepping down at the end of the season in a move that had been a long time coming, to be brutally honest with you. So, in fact, the lady that I'm about to bring up, Molly Miller, the current coach at Grand Canyon, is actually somebody, who I brought up a few months ago on the program in anticipation of this eventuality. And really, the way Missouri has treated women's basketball historically and in recent years, frankly, Molly Miller may be out of reach for Missouri. But the reason I bring her up is because not only, Grand Canyon is obviously a lower level than the SEC, but there is a Missouri connection. Molly Miller went to high school at Springfield Kickapoo, where she was a standout in Springfield, Missouri in her high school career. Ends up playing college basketball at Drury, Division II Drury, where she was a great player there as well, graduated in 2008. And then 7 years later, she's the head coach of said Drury, where, am I saying Drury terribly enough for you, by the way? But she's 26-4 in her first season at her alma mater. 6 seasons there. Basically, the win total goes up every year, more or less. 26-4, 26-5, 30 wins, 31 wins, 35 wins, and then finally 32-0 in her final campaign at Drury, which was the COVID season. So her best team, in fact, didn't get to compete in the tournament there, unfortunately. But then after leaving her alma mater there, she's now in her 5th season at Grand Canyon, where she started off 18-7, now 22 wins, 21 wins, 24 wins, and now this season, Molly Miller and her Grand Canyon squad is 26-2. Again, I just think Molly Miller, just at first glance, just seems like the complete package. She's almost Dennis Gates-like, in that she has a really, really impressive resume, and the only holes you can really poke in it are, she hasn't done it at the highest level of basketball just yet. Well, that's all you could really say about Dennis Gates and his time at Cleveland State as well, in my opinion, because when you really dug into it, it was hard to say that he did anything wrong during his stop there. I feel similarly about Molly Miller, and on top of that, she's actually about 6 years younger than Dennis Gates as well. And a charismatic young person to be in charge of your basketball program. By the way, she's got a family too, couple kids, a husband. I mean, honestly, she's kind of the complete package. I'm just describing you basically a package, a marketable person who can maybe give you some extra NIL dollars, maybe get some more bodies and interest and eyeballs on this Missouri basketball program, which this Missouri women's basketball program, of course, I'm talking about, which obviously could use a jolt in the arm. And the good news with women's basketball is you've already got Mizzou Arena. You've got the practice facilities. Everything that the men have, more or less, you have access to as well. And Missouri has really good basketball facilities by all accounts. So while Missouri women's basketball has never been a huge priority, I think if somehow you could lure Molly Miller, no relation, by the way, in case that wasn't clear, but if somehow you could lure somebody, a charismatic, and a presumptive rising star in this sport, I think you've got a real opportunity there to shoot this program in the arm and have some real interest in it. Hey, if there's Mizzou men's basketball fans, believe me, there can be women's basketball fans too. You just need a star, and maybe that star is Molly Miller. By the way, my haters out there should definitely put together a montage of me attempting and failing to say Drury in the past segment. I really felt like Tina Fey in 30 Rock trying to say the rural juror in that particular show. That was a bit of a tongue twister for whatever reason. But you know what? Speaking of charismatic blondes who have ties to Missouri, I did see somebody, speaking of women's basketball potential coaches, somebody out there who I'm a fan of jokingly said, hey, how about Sophie Cunningham as the coach? Well, obviously that's not happening right now with Sophie in the middle of her WNBA career. But having said that, could I see Sophie Cunningham getting into coaching someday? Well, let's see. Robin Pingeton made $400,000 last season. And while that's about a tenth of what Dennis Gates made this season, Sophie is set to make about $110,000 with the Indiana Fever this season. So that's about a quarter of what Robin Pingeton is going to make. I'd say, if anything, salaries for women's basketball in this day and age is probably trending up, if anything. So, yeah, I'd say if you're a player, you're much more incentivized in women's basketball to get into coaching if you're a former WNBA player than you are an NBA player. If Sophie Cunningham was the caliber of player that she is in the men's side, well, she'd be making $15 million a year or something like that. So could I see her one day getting into coaching? With her competitive fire, again, with her charisma and ability to possibly be the big-time face of a program, I could see it on that level. And economically, I can absolutely see it too. That may be the biggest, in fact, that may be actually the biggest factor of all. And Dennis Gates has said that Missouri's 7'3" freshman Trent Burns, who has been sidelined all season so far, is cleared to play. But a lot of Missouri fans debating, should Missouri play him down the stretch? Is it worth burning the red shirt? Let's talk about that coming up here in just a little bit. But I can tell you from personal experience, life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps, and of course, before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You can be covered in less than 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. As a parent, I want to make sure my family is financially protected no matter what happens. Fabric gives me that peace of mind. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. And as many people have been asking, Carson, one viewer of this program, asks, you think Trent Burns is a redshirt at this point or an X factor before the tournament? Well, simple question. Would I play Trent Burns this season? Would being the operative question. Would I? Yes. And here's why, because this is the year. Forget about the future, honestly. We're going to worry about getting a 5th year for Trent Burns. What were you doing 5 years ago? How many things in your life have changed? What has changed at Missouri basketball in the last 5 years? So would I play him potentially? Absolutely. But do I think he's going to play? Not really, because while he is tall, that's great. He's 7'3". He's got tons of upside. He seems to have a bit of touch from the outside as well. He also has 0 experience. He's a freshman. If in practice, here's the real question to me. If in practice, because obviously none of us as fans have seen anything from Burns, but if that kid is a difference maker defensively, then I would play him. I really would, because especially in a scenario where Josh Gray were compromised or in foul trouble, you needed a second center and a second defensive anchor in the middle for whatever reason, then you play him. Absolutely. But again, I just don't really see that particular scenario coming up, because I think what Missouri has in Gray is enough, number one. And number two, it's just hard for me to believe that you can really trust a young man with that little experience to be a real defensive anchor. I think you see it time and time again with these big guys. I think the defense comes along a little bit slowly. They don't know where to go. They're freshmen. They're like bulls in china shops, baby deer slipping around on ice skates sometimes. Whatever the stupid analogy is, it's just hard for me to believe that Burns is ready to play significant, important defensive minutes in the NCAA tournament, because short of that, I don't think there's any reason to play him whatsoever. It's not about the future, because this is the season. Don't worry about 4 or 5 years from now. Worry about right now. Worry about 2025, because this is a rare opportunity that Missouri has in front of it. So the red shirt doesn't matter. It's just more about, hey, do we have enough guys? Is Burns actually going to make this team better? In the short term, that seems like a stretch to me. And finally, a little addendum to my Luther Burden talk. One fan, just a fan of sports on YouTube, says that he agrees with me. Some people have really exaggerated Burden's, quote, character issues. 3 entire seasons. How many incidents are we really talking about on the sidelines? 1, maybe 2 displays of bad body language over 3 seasons, and a few unsportsmanlike penalties over 3 seasons. Yeah, not buying it. Of course, not buying it in terms of the character issues. And I bring this up mostly because I focused on the body language on my previous discussion on this. But I will say, the unsportsmanlike penalties, hey, there was at least one bad moment this season from Burden where he had, I believe, 2 consecutive unsportsmanlike penalties that put Missouri in a 3rd and in a 2nd and 36 or something absurd, one of those things. And, well, Eli Drinkwitz got on Burden, too, by the way. Yelled at him in front of the team, which is not something he does very often to anybody, much less a star of Burden's caliber. And, well, there's a few reasons for that, but I think, again, one of them is I don't think it was really necessary for the most part. Luther Burden's, 21 years old or something like that, a guy who it would be in his 2nd semester of college, his junior year, if he were still going to college. Let's all think back, especially the male listeners of this audience, what you were doing your junior year of college, your 2nd semester. Did you occasionally maybe get a little bit hot under the collar, something like that? Maybe you lose your temper, that type of deal. Maybe your body language wasn't always perfect either. Again, I'm not saying Luther Burden is perfect, but what I am saying is I agree with just a fan of sports. I think a lot of this stuff has really been exaggerated there. And again, sometimes in NFL draft season, remind yourself of who is it that's putting out this information? Do they have a reason to put out this information? Do they maybe want Luther Burden to fall in the draft to perhaps where they're picking? Maybe the irony is the people who are putting out this kind of information through back channels, or they actually want to take Luther Burden and hope that he falls. Again, just tons of gamesmanship here. And the bottom line here is that it'd be one thing if when Brady Cook, for instance, whenever he's asked about Luther Burden, it's always positive stuff. I've never heard anything from Burden's teammates negative whatsoever, or going the other way. When Burden is asked about Brady Cook, it's all love going back the other way. It'd be another thing if when Brady Cook was asked about Luther Burden, he was like, Luther? Well, Luther's Luther. Anytime you say the person's name 2 or 3 times in one sentence, that's always a bad sign. But fortunately, we never had any of that with Luther Burden and his teammates in his 3 years that I could ever see. So, hey, as always, thanks for listening to this edition of Locked On Mizzou, and thanks for making it your first listen. I'll be back tomorrow post-game after Missouri and Vanderbilt. And for your second listen, check out Locked On College Basketball. Why wait for March? Be the most informed college basketball fan now. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. So until tomorrow, I am John Miller. Thanks as always for listening to Locked On Mizzou.